Hi, my name is Simone Coleman. I am a Behaviour Specialist and trainee Educational Psychologist from Dublin. So this is my third video in this series, and today I'll be talking about bilingualism, or having English as an additional language, and I will be discussing some common myths around this and also some tips and strategies to support your child if you are in a bilingual or English as an additional language household. So as I mentioned before, I'm not a speech and language therapist, and if you are concerned about your child's speech and language development, you should contact your GP or public health nurse to get more individualised support for your child. So what do we mean when we say bilingual? Well, this simply just means speaking two languages, as opposed to being monolingual, which means just speaking one language. But of course you might know multiple languages and then you'd be multilingual. And the reason I'm quite interested in this area is because in my private work, I would work with families of children with autism who may not be speaking or have some sort of speech delay, and the parents would be from different cultural backgrounds, speaking different languages, and they would ask me, should they speak the dominant language of this country, English, to their child only, or should they continue to speak their home language to their child as well? And some of these parents would have been told by professionals to only speak English to their children, as English is the dominant language here and is the language that the child will be exposed to in school. But if English isn't the parent's first language, then the interaction and communication with their child isn't going to come as naturally to them. And what's really important when communicating is having that rich and quality interaction with your child. So in order to have this natural and quality interaction and communication with their child, it's important that the parent speaks whatever language or languages that comes naturally to them, and whatever language the child would have been exposed to from birth. And while speech and language delays can occur for a number of different reasons, it is a myth that speaking more than one language to your child will cause a speech delay. So while it is true that bilingual children may say their first words slightly later than monolingual children, it should still be within the typical or normal age range. So bilingualism itself does not cause language delay. Another myth is that when children mix or switch between two languages when speaking or in the same sentence, that this means that the child is becoming confused or having difficulty with bilingualism, when in fact this is simply known as code mixing or code switching and is actually a normal part of becoming bilingual. Another myth is that if you want to raise your child with two languages, that you should adopt a one parent, one language approach, where each parent speaks a different language to the child. But actually there is no research to suggest that this is the only or best way to raise a child bilingually. And finally, the myth that I would have come across the most would be that if a parent wants their child to speak the majority language, so in this case English, or if the child is not speaking at all, then the parents should stop speaking their home language to the child. When in fact there really isn't any research to back this up. And actually, if the parent is not fluent in the majority language, in English, then the interactions between the parent and child are not going to be natural or comfortable, and the quality of that interaction and communication is going to be diminished. So really, the parent should not stop speaking the home language. This is the language that the child would have been exposed to the most and exposed to from birth, and it is perfectly fine to speak both, to mix between the two, because you know the child will be exposed to both in the home and when they go to school. Additionally, research has shown that children who have a strong foundation in their home language will actually learn a second language more easily. So again, if a child has been exposed to their home language from birth, they'll have, even if they're not speaking themselves, they will have receptively heard this the majority of the time, and having that foundation of understanding will help them acquire the second language. So this next video clip from YouTube is just some of the most up-to-date research on bilingualism and autism, which may be of interest to parents who might suspect their child has autism, or maybe they have a confirmed diagnosis of autism and you're wondering about whether you should speak your home language or just English to your child.
So, I mean, yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good question to kick off this discussion. Like, why are we even talking about this in the first place? Why does this matter? Well, so to start off, we know three things that are quite key to this conversation. So number one, we know that more people worldwide are becoming bilingual. Number two, we know that the rate of diagnosing an individual with autism is also increasing. That's also on the rise. Number three, we know that parents and practitioners have concerns surrounding raising autistic children speaking more than one language, because there seems to be this widespread notion that, you know, another language will be too much, and that it could be overtaxing and it could disadvantage these children both in verbal and nonverbal domains. So given these worldwide statistics about autism, about bilingualism, and given the concerns that, you know, we've received from parents and practitioners, it just raises the question, what kind of impact does bilingualism have on autistic children?
What exactly are the highlights, I guess, in the evidence-based, you know, the research around the world? What does the data tell us?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, so studies have focused on different domains of the impact. So while some have focused on verbal domains, others have focused on nonverbal domains. The domain I focus on, for example, is nonverbal, and as I mentioned, is specific to thinking skills. And as far as thinking skills are concerned, researchers have either found an evidence of an advantage for autistic bilinguals, which means that autistic bilingual children had better performance in their thinking skills relative to their monolingual peers in different domains. So sometimes it could be flexible switching, which is cognitive flexibility, like how, how able are you to switch between one task to the next? So this ability to switch back and forth, or in domains like sustained attention, how well can you stay focused on a task, for example, but that is kind of one finding. So it's been one of two findings. Either we have found an advantage in specific domains, or we have found no disadvantage, which means that while autistic children didn't do better than their monolingual peers, they also were not worse off. So the performance was equivalent. And so the most consistent finding across the literature, as far as, you know, at least the nonverbal domain of thinking skills is concerned, is that being bilingual did not harm children's thinking skills, specifically, obviously within, I'm speaking about the autistic samples here that were used. When we move on to the verbal domains, that finding still persists. So there has been no evidence that speaking a second language in autistic children will add further delay to their language development. And so basically, these are the two things that these are the two main findings from the literature. So not only can autistic children become proficient bilinguals and function successfully in both languages, but the finding of no negative impact of bilingualism has been pretty consistent. It is a robust finding found across the literature.
So hopefully that video puts some parents' mind at ease about whether they should continue speaking the home language with their child if they suspect they have autism or have a language delay. So finally, moving on to some tips for raising a child bilingually. Well, firstly, you want to increase the language quantity, and the quantity of linguistic input with children actually predicts the amount of vocabulary and their grammatical development. And the richer the input, so the more vocab that they're exposed to, the more likelihood that they'll be successful in acquiring the two languages. And secondly, you want to increase the language quality. And I've mentioned this a few times, the quality of the interactions is really, really important. So having stimulating face-to-face interactions with your child, reading books, reduce screen time, and having those, you know, collaborative, two-way, back and forth communication sessions with your children. And finally, variability of language input. So this means having friends and family interact and talk with your child, because having regular interactions with different speakers can help boost the proficiency of two languages in your child. So I hope you found this talk on bilingualism helpful, and thank you very much for listening.